guys, it's Kevin in my review for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. And this one, we once again focus on the Spangler family. They've officially become part of the Ghostbusters, and in doing so, they have relocated to New York City, where they are now in the iconic Ghostbusters firehouse. And while they are going about their regular missions, they end up stumbling across this ancient artifact that belongs to this very evil force that is, potentially going to cause a second ice age. And so the Spanglers have to now summon in the old Ghostbusters, and it's up to all of them to do what they can to stop this potential catastrophe from happening and figure out how they can defeat this evil once and for all. And I was really looking forward to this movie. After Ghostbusters Afterlife, I was really pleased with how that film went. I thought they did a great job of combining the old and the new, taking those things that we love from the old Ghostbusters films, but introducing some really great new characters, doing a good job of having a legacy-focused sequel, but not making it feel forced, actually making it seem like the legacy characters have a purpose and things like that. But I'm not gonna lie, the way that movie ended, I said it in my review and I'll say it again, felt like it could have been it. It felt like this was like one final send-off. The whole movie kind of worked as like a tribute to Harold Ramis in that way, and it just kind of felt like that was like the note to end it on, especially the ending of that movie. It just felt like this passing of a torch, but in a way where it's like, it could end there, but the movie was successful, and as a result, was announced that there was going to be a sequel, and I thought, okay, as long as the same people are on board, I think this could really work. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas that you could do with these characters and things like that, and, what we were seeing from the marketing, it really did seem like that's what this was going to be. They were going to dive into some new and creative ideas, for them to take this franchise further and things like that, and so I was really excited to see how this would turn out, and I will say, while there definitely is still a lot to like about Frozen Empire, as a film, I don't think this is nearly as successful as the previous one for quite a few reasons, and it really did end up disappointing me in many significant areas, but we are just getting into right now. So, of course, I do want to start off talking about the cast here, which was easily one of the best elements of the last movie. I think there were a lot of great actors there that really ended up just, putting their fullest talents into it, and the same goes for this one. Everyone's doing a really great job. Once again, though, I have to highlight McKenna, Grace, who just continues to be the shining star of this franchise, and where they take Phoebe as a character, I think is really well done in this movie. She has a very strong arc in this film, kind of trying to find her place within the Ghostbusters and things like that, and I really liked what they end up doing with her. She is by far the emotional anchor of this franchise. So much of the heart of this series revolves around her, and you really just find yourself latching onto her, and Grace is just, again, so incredibly charismatic in this role. She's someone that you just really enjoy watching. Even when this character is at her lowest moments, I think that she still does a really great job here, and, I would be down to see more of these films as long as she's a part of it. Like, regardless of how I feel about this movie, if they announce another Ghostbusters film, McKenna Grace is a part of it, I will be on board, because I really like what she's been doing with this character, and I think this is yet again another really strong performance from her, so I think she does a really great job. Same goes for Paul Rudd, who, he's Paul Rudd. He's so much fun, he has so much energy, he's a very charismatic actor, and he does a really great job in this film once again. Gary has quite a bit more to do this time around. He himself is now, a part of this family. He's, dating, he's dating Callie, so he's kind of trying to figure out, where he fits in and things like that, and I think that he really does end up working out really well. I really enjoyed his inclusion in the film. I thought he did a really good job. And so I thought that those two actors were really good. Finn Wolfhard and Carrie Coon are good here too. We'll talk about their characters in a little bit, but they still do a really good job here. But I gotta say, one of the biggest standouts of this movie in terms of the new characters we have here was Kumail Nanjiani, who does play the character of Nadim, a character that I'll talk about a little bit in terms of like how I feel about him, but I think as, a performance, he did a really good job in this film. I thought that overall, he was as fun as he usually is, and I thought that he brought his own, comedic sensibilities to this film really well and really fit in with the general vibe of this cast, and I thought that, he did a really good job. But of course, we have to talk about the legacy actors here, who obviously have a lot more to do this time around. We didn't know they were going to be in the last movie. We know they're here now, and for the most part, the majority of them have quite a bit to do, especially when it comes to Dan Aykroyd, who maybe besides McKenna Grace is giving the best performance in this movie. Ray has a lot more to do in this film and kind of has his own arc of his own that I thought actually worked out really well. It was very sentimental, the directions they went in them, but you can tell that Aykroyd just has so much passion, getting back into this and getting to play Ray Stantz after all these years. He really just hasn't missed a beat as this character, and I thought that he just did such a great job sort of being this mentor for a few significant characters in this movie. I thought he was just really great here, and Ernie Hudson as well I thought was another really big standout. I really enjoyed him in this film. I thought he was kind of like he's kind of like the most level-headed out of everybody in this film, and I thought that he did a really great job. The dynamic between him and Dan Aykroyd has really never been stronger, and I thought that, their whole, duo was really good. Bill Murray is good here too. I'll talk about him a little bit later. I keep saying that for quite a few things. You'll know why in a second. But he does do a good job, when he is here. Same with Annie Potts. William Atherton also is really good. Everyone does a really good job in this movie. I don't think there's a single false performance in the bunch here. And while there's definitely quite a few problems with this film, the cast is very much not one of them. I think all of the ensemble is just really, really great here. Alright, so now we get to the things that really do end up bringing this film down, which is the directing and the writing. Now, Jason Reitman did a really good job, I think, directing the last film. You could tell that he had a clear direction of where he wanted to go, but he was also kind of, following in his father's footsteps, and as a result, it kind of felt like this labor of love of sorts. Like, this is this was like a passion project, and not having him as the director definitely did have me concerned. I feel like a lot of the reason that film worked as well as it did was because of him being involved, was because he was the one directing. And, he's not directing this film. Gill Keenan is now in charge, who did write the screenplay for the last movie. He was one of the co-writers for the last film. Directing-wise, though, it just doesn't feel like he has as clear of a direction of where he really wants this to go. It feels like it's just kind of fragmented as to what he wants to do here. Does he want this to be, just a fun little adventure of seeing these characters, kind of just, defeating ghosts and things like that? Or is he trying to do something a little bit more introspective, getting to pair these characters up and getting to expand the world out a bit more? I feel like his directing, it doesn't hit as hard as it did in Afterlife. It doesn't feel nearly as cohesive. It's not bad by any means, but it just feels like he wasn't supposed to be the first choice for this film. He kind of was like thrown into this role, didn't really know what to do, and as a result, the movie just doesn't flow nearly as well. There are comedic bits that work really well. I definitely did laugh quite a few times during this movie. Same with the emotional moments, but that perfect blend that we had in Afterlife, it just isn't really here. The movie doesn't really know what it wants to be this time around. What it doesn't have that consistent tone throughout that I think Afterlife just did a really good job with, and as a result, I think the directing just isn't nearly as strong. But the screenplay is really where most of my issues from this film really stem from. This just is not a very strong screenplay, and here's the thing, like, Afterlife had some really good ideas, but for the most part was a pretty simplistic story. This time around, this film is surprisingly, very convoluted. There's a lot of different things that they are trying to do, and some of them do actually work very well. There's a really good scene where we go to this Ghostbusters museum, and we kind of get to see that they have kind of created this whole, facility for, catching ghosts and things like that, and this is like a hub for all of them, and I thought that was a really cool idea. You've built this building now to contain ghosts, and there's a lot of history there and things like that. There's a lot of different props that they use. I thought that was a really fun idea. That's something different that we really haven't gotten to see before. Seeing these characters, interact with the legacy characters is a really fun idea. There's a really good arc with Ray in this movie and how he is sort of this mentor, but he also, but he also is aging and he's not really sure what his place is within the Ghostbusters anymore. Should he be getting in on the action or should he be kind of like stepping back a bit? I thought that actually worked really well. I liked his overall arc in this movie. I thought that was, something that was really strong here. When it comes to Phoebe, I think she is a really strong arc in this film. Very early on in the movie, she kind of ends up becoming demoted because she's a kid, and you shouldn't have a kid participate in these kind of, very dangerous missions. And so she kind of has to now sit out, and you can see the effect that this really has on her. She wants to get in on the action. She wants to be a more, prominent member of the Ghostbusters, and she's kind of trying to figure out how she fits into all of that. And I thought that was a really interesting arc for her. I liked what they were trying to do there. For the character of Gary, his entire arc is whether or not he is overstepping. Should he try to be a father figure to these kids, or should he just continue to be like their teacher or their mentor? Where does he really fit into all of this? I thought that was a really good arc for him. But if you're noticing, there are a lot of arcs in this movie. There's a lot that's going on here, and the biggest issue that I have is that I can't really tell you what the main focus is supposed to be. None of these things I'm saying feel like they belong in this movie. There's something here that clearly doesn't fit, and I can't really figure out what it is. But the problem is we have essentially like a season's worth of storylines in this movie. Like, this feels more like a Ghostbusters TV show that hasn't existed. That's what this movie feels like to me, is that we have these storylines that would be very effective if they were played out over like a season of television, but crammed into a not even 2-hour movie, it just feels a little messy. It doesn't feel like we can balance all of these things because the movie doesn't seem to know what it wants to focus on, because in the midst of all these individual character arcs that I told you about, there is also a lot of lore and world building we're doing here. Kumail Nanjiani's character, for example, he is coming in as someone who is part of this family of sorts. He is trying to, figure out more about his ancestry and things like that, and there's some interesting ideas there, but at no point does it feel like this fits in the movie. It feels like they are trying to add more elements to the film that it just really didn't need. What they do with his character, I just have a really hard time buying into. I'm like, really? This is something that's been around all this time and we're just finding out about it now? It just feels a bit far-fetched. And nothing against Kumail Nanjiani. Like I said, I like his inclusion in the film. I think he works well with this cast, but his character, I just never really felt like fit in with everything that was going on. With everything else the movie's trying to do, I just didn't really feel like this fit in as well. But the problem is that plot point is incredibly crucial to what's going on with this whole story with Garaka, who honestly really ends up being put on the back burner. The first 2 acts of this movie is basically trying to figure out what our main story is going to be. The actual threats of this movie doesn't really come into play until I would say like the hour, 10-minute-ish mark. Like, it literally felt like it took that long because the movie is spending so much time on all of these other individual arcs. And again, they're not bad. Like, I like the idea of some of these. Like, with Phoebe, for example, her having this whole thing of her being benched and trying to, figure out how she fits in, and her actually befriending a ghost. I don't think that's a bad idea at all. I think there's a lot of things you can actually do with that. I like the idea of that being a potential idea to explore. We've never really seen something like that in this franchise. I think that's a really fun idea. There is a side arc with Carrie Coon's character and her trying to figure out if she's overstepping as a mom. They're not, she kind of feels like she has a strained relationship with Phoebe, and she's trying to kind of figure out how to kind of step back in that way and what she needs to do to be a better mom. And I thought that arc was very half-baked, but that is clearly something that they're trying to do. But you can see what the issue is here. Like, there's so much going on. It never feels like we have time to really dive into what the central focus of this movie is going to be. So when then the film basically takes a break from all of these other arcs they've been, setting up throughout the movie to dive into the mythology of Garaka. It doesn't feel like this is something that we've been leading to. It feels like, oh, well, now we're actually starting the plot. Now we're actually, we have to get here because the movie needs some sort of obstacle. The movie needs some sort of threat to emerge, and you're just not that interested because it's happening so late into the film. Whereas I think if they had peppered Garaka throughout the movie, I think this actually really could have worked. I like the idea of Garaka. I like the actual, motivation that Garaka has and things like that, but it never feels like we get a chance to fully dive into any of that. They dive into Kumail Nanjiani and how he's going to, connect to all of this and how he's going to help them, take down Garaka and things like that, but they don't dive enough into this thread and and really just the possibilities of what you can do here. I mean, we had that great teaser where everyone was just kind of on a beach and everything, it was July, it was hot, and then there's this ice that just starts trickling down and eventually ends up encasing the entire beach. But that doesn't happen until way later into the film than you are expecting it to. And by the time it does, I mean, the movie is almost over at that point. So again, it never feels like we're able to fully dive into anything because the movie can't make up its mind as to what's going on. There just simply is not enough time to dive into all of these arcs that's happening. And that really leads to my other big issue with this movie, is that there's simply just too many damn characters here. And look, I understand that you want to have that, you want to blend the old and the new. I totally get that. You have the legacy characters now. We know that they're in this movie. You want to utilize them. But the problem, that's not really the issue with this movie. I think they utilize them pretty well, specifically Ray and, specifically when it comes to Ray and, Winston. I really enjoy their bond throughout this movie. There's a really good arc about them kind of aging and them kind of not feeling like they are as into this and things like that, but trying to relive their glory days. And I think that's really good. I like that they're doing that with these characters, kind of seeing them at their heights, seeing them at a point where they've reached their peak and things like that. They're in the best, place that they've been. Now, where do they really go from here? They feel like they've lived all of their life. What really is their purpose anymore? I think that is a really good arc for those two characters. Venkman has about as much to do as he did in the previous movie. I don't know if it's that Bill Murray just doesn't really want to be in this franchise much anymore, but he's really not in here much at all until he absolutely has to be. And so I was kind of disappointed by that. Same with Annie Potts. Like, they kind of use her as like a fill-in for Venkman, it feels like, but they don't really know what to do with her, and so that's another big issue. And then you have Peck, who's in this movie, Mayor Peck, which it's cool to see him here, but again, he feels like an afterthought. He's here to be this plot device of sorts to create an obstacle for these characters that I feel like they could have still logically gotten there with a different character. You didn't need Peck to do that. But if you're going to bring him back, you have to have him back in some meaningful way, and they just don't really do that in this movie, and so that really is an issue for me. And I think the main reason for that is because there's just so many other characters we are dealing with here. I think the four Spanglers, would have been fine. I think you could have just focused on them and the legacy characters, and that really would have been enough. But unfortunately, the film also wants to introduce some new characters. When it comes to the character of Nadim, we spend a lot of time focusing on him, and like I said, his ancestry and his role in everything. And as much as I enjoyed Kumail Nanjiani in this film, he's taking time away from characters that we already know and that we want to learn more about, and arcs that are, clearly the film wants to spend time on, and they just don't really get a chance to do that. Patton Oswalt shows up, and he's essentially just here to spout exposition about, Garaka and things like that. That's literally all he does. He only shows up, I think, in, one scene for, 10 minutes, and they made, a huge deal out of it in the trailer. Easily could have been cut out of the movie. There's really no reason for him to be here. You could have easily had this exposition delivered in a different way. You didn't need his character to really be there. But probably the two characters that, unfortunately, I feel like really just don't have any purpose in this film whatsoever are the characters of Lucky and Podcast, who I really liked both of them in the previous movie. I love Celeste O'Connor. I really loved Logan Kim in the last film. I thought he was very funny. But here, they just don't really serve much of a purpose other than, well, they were in the last movie, so they have to be here. And I feel like they didn't really need to be. I feel like you still could have used them, but maybe in like the bookends in the movie, like in the beginning of the film and the end of the film, because it just feels like they don't really have a ton to do here. I kind of forgot that they were in the movie. Like when we would cut back to Lucky and we would see her participating in, you know, stuff with the other characters, I was like, oh yeah, she's here. That's a character that's in this movie. And again, Celeste O'Connor, as usual, they're very good here. Like they give a good performance, but it just doesn't feel like they are given much to do, much to work with as an actor, and the character of Lucky also isn't given much to do. And then Podcast, I mean, like I said, such a huge standout in the previous movie. Here, it just feels like they have reduced him to just, you know, the most like they have reduced him to like the most basic essentials as a character. All he really does is, you know, talk about things that are inherently more interesting than what he's actually doing, and I just wanted to see more of him. I felt like he was just kind of useless here. Like, why do we even need this character in this movie? Like, they if you're gonna have these characters, you got to utilize them, and they really don't. So I didn't really understand the point of them. Trevor as a character has almost nothing to do here. Same with Afterlife, but even more so here. At least on a rewatch with Afterlife, there is somewhat of an arc there where he is kind of absent in terms of his relationship with Phoebe, and then he starts to believe her, and they kind of, you know, go through this adventure together. There's sort of an arc of sorts there, but here, I mean, they're really struggling to do something with him. All he really ends up doing in this movie is this arc of sorts with Gozer, where he is something with pizza. I don't even remember much of what it was because it was so inconsequential to what was going on. It was admittedly funny, like every time the film cut back to it, I did end up laughing, but I'm like, really, this is all you end up doing with his character? It's like, if you were going to not do much with Trevor in the movie, maybe he should just, I don't know, like be off in college or something. Like, it just doesn't feel like they know what to do with him. Like 2 movies in, they haven't done anything substantial with his character, and I'm just wondering like why they even bother with him, because there's so many other there's so many characters in this movie. You don't, you know, there's so many other characters in this movie that are so much more interesting. He's easily one that they didn't even really need to focus on if they wanted to. You could have literally just had him like go off to college in the beginning of this movie, and there you fix the problem of having Lucky there. You can have Lucky go off to college with him and things like that, or you can have like Podcasts like saying goodbye, you know, maybe Podcast is there to wish him off or something. Like that fixes the problem right then and there. You add those little things and the movie is so much better as a result. But again, because it can't seem to find that tight focus, the movie is just so incredibly scattered in terms of what it wants to do, and it's veering off in so many different directions. It's hard to even remember, you know, all of what is really going on. There's another character played by James Acaster who the film wants to make as like another sidekick of sorts, but they don't know what to do with him, so it doesn't really feel like he has a place here. So again, it's a very messy screenplay because there's arcs going on that are inherently interesting, but the movie doesn't really know what to focus on. And some of those arcs I talked about, like Paul Rudd's, get dropped like very early on to the movie. There's not really enough time to focus on them. The main arcs we're dealing with, aside from like the lore building, is what they're doing with Phoebe and what they're clearly trying to do with Ray. I don't understand why you don't just make that the main focus. Like all this other stuff you didn't need to focus on in this movie. You could have focused that in a different film, and I think that would have worked. But unfortunately here, it just feels like there was so much they wanted to dive into, they just couldn't help themselves. And again, like I said, it feels more like a season of a television show than it does a movie. But the problem is it's a, you know, not even 2-hour movie, so there's not nearly enough time to dive into any of that. So it just feels so incredibly truncated and cut short. But the thing is, I go through all these plot points and I can't even figure out which one to really get rid of. I can't say the Kumail Nanjiani storyline because that's integral to what's going on with Garaka. I can't say what's going on with Ray and Winston because that's a pretty essential part of the story too. Ray is a huge focal point of this story, and if you get rid of that undercuts a lot of the like emotional developments in this movie. I can't say Phoebe because Phoebe is essentially still supposed to be, I think, the main character of this franchise. So if you get rid of that, you know, she doesn't really have much to do at that point. So I think that these arcs on their own aren't bad. I think that these arcs can work in the movie. They just need to find a way to kind of streamline things a little bit more, so this just flowed a lot better. So it was a lot more cohesive of a story. Maybe you could have still had all these arcs, but maybe not focus on them in the way that they did. Again, treating it more like a TV show than a movie, kind of making me wonder, should this have just been a TV series in the first place? Because it feels like they have so many ideas. Why not just do that? So yeah, it's frustrating because I enjoy a lot of what's going on in this movie. It's just when you put it all together, it is just very hard to it just doesn't really fit in the way that they really think it does. And like I said before, when the film does get to the third act, it does get very exciting. It's clearly trying to have this like epic sort of payoff, but there's just too many things happening here. Like, there's too much that, again, similar to the rest of the movie, like, there's too many things that the film has set up that it needs to pay off, and you really recognize just how much is going on and the sheer amount of plot points that the film has started when you get to that third act, and you're like, oh, yeah, this is happening, and now we have to have this moment, and now this character needs to have this revelation, now this character needs to do this. It's like, there's just too much going on here, and I really think they just needed to pump the brakes a bit, and I think this would have been, and I think I would have enjoyed the third act of this movie that much more. The way they try to tie everything in together is so incredibly flimsy and ridiculous. I could not believe this was the direction they decided to go, because there's a point in the movie where I'm like, wait, how does this fit into this? What is the point of this subplot? Why did we even have this plot going on here if that's how it was going to end? And then I'm like, oh, that's what you were doing all along. Okay, that's kind of stupid. Like, I didn't really understand why they spent so much time on this for them to do this stupid, the way they tried to tie everything in together. Again, it just felt kind of flimsy. It felt like they were trying way too hard to be like, oh, well, this all does have a purpose. This all does fit in. And you really understand just how much of a just how overstuffed so much of the movie is. You really get a sense of how overbloated the movie is by the climax of this movie, by how much is going on, by how many things we're trying to wrap up, by how many, threads we're trying to pay off here. It just doesn't feel like it all gels together. The movie clearly thinks that it does, but it really doesn't. And if anything, it just really makes that issue that much more apparent. And so it's just a very messy screenplay all around that I just had a really hard time latching onto. Cinematography wise, I don't think this movie is too bad at all. I actually think there's a lot of good effects here. I think the way they utilize Garaka and things like that I thought was really well done. When they use Garaka, I like the design of Garaka. I like, what ends up happening. When we get into the third act of this movie, it's like, okay, this is what I wanted this movie to be. It feels like you're not utilizing this premise enough. The third act, really, when they lean into it, the movie is very stunning visually, and I really enjoyed what they were doing here cinematography wise. So I think they did a good job with that. The score also, nothing really to harp on with that. And then the editing, like I said, the movie just feels so incredibly scattered in terms of editing. It's constantly jumping from one thing to the next. I could barely even keep up with what was happening. It felt like there was a new plot point starting up like every 5 minutes in like the first act of this movie, that whenever we would come back to, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a thing. Or there would be some things that they didn't come back to at all, and I was like, wait, what happened to this? And then they'd finally come back around to it, and I'd be like, oh yeah, that's still a thing that's happening. So overall, like, it's just not a very well put together movie in terms of the runtime. It's not boring by any means. Like, I wasn't like checked out of this movie or anything. I definitely was trying to enjoy it, but the more it went on, the more it just continued to lose me. And like I said, by the end of it, I mean, I really was just let down by how incredibly scattered so much of this film was. And that's really the best way to describe Frozen Empire. It's just kind of scattered. I think that there are ideas here that work. I think there are clearly things they're trying to dive into that are interesting. There are ways they are trying to evolve the franchise that I really do like. There's some character pairings here that I really do enjoy. Phoebe and Ray, for example. I enjoyed their dynamic in this movie, but I wanted more of that. I enjoy what they're trying to do with the character of Gary, but we don't get enough with him. I enjoy what they're trying to do with Carrie Coon's character, we don't get enough of her. The legacy characters really feel like they don't have as much. Aside from Ray and Winston, the film doesn't know how to utilize them properly. They don't know what to really do with them aside from just, catchphrases and things like that, and, just their most, like, basic essentials. They don't really know what to do with them. There's a plethora of new characters here that the film also does not know what to do with, including, reusing some characters from the previous film and just not finding a place for them in this movie. And there's so many different arcs and there's so many different elements here that when we eventually try to when we try to implement the main threat into this film, it just comes across as forced. It comes across as too little too late. And though there are some really strong moments in the third act of this movie, it's just not enough to save what is ultimately just such a jumbled mess of a film that I just had a really hard time enjoying throughout. I think there are some fun moments here. I enjoy these characters. I would like to see more of these films. I don't think we're going to, because unfortunately this film really underperformed, especially, compared to the first one. This movie did not nearly have the legs that people expected it to. And so I don't think we're going to get another one from this series, but if they did, I would still be down. I still enjoy these characters. I still enjoy what they're trying to do here. I think this is just the perfect example of just trying to do a little bit too much and not recognizing when you need to kind of pump the brakes a bit. I think if they were to find a more I think if they were able to distill this down to just a few storylines and a few characters and have a more of a focus, I think this really could have worked. But as is, it's just a film that I had a really hard time fully latching onto. I had a hard time fully, feeling invested in. There's so many different arcs and characters here that I really liked, but I just wanted to see a lot more of. And the way they tried to tie everything together, it just really came across as haphazard and just did not blend nearly as smoothly as I think they wanted it to. Like I said, I think there's still a lot they can do with the Ghostbusters IP, and I don't know, I heard they're doing like a TV show and things like that, and I kind of feel like maybe that is what they should be doing moving forward. They clearly want to introduce these new ideas, and I think the way you're able to do that in a way that is cohesive is in a TV show, because there's enough here to where you could do that in a TV show. I don't know if they're gonna, include these characters or start fresh. I don't really know what the plan is, but it does seem like they have a lot of interesting ideas moving forward for this franchise, and I do want to see them get to, I do want to see those come to fruition. I just hope that whatever they end up pursuing moving forward, it has way more of a vision, way more of a definitive idea, way more of a focus than this really did, because overall, I just found myself very disappointed in this film. I still did have fun with it. I still enjoyed the characters. I still enjoy a lot of what they're doing, but as a whole, this film very much let me down. And so I am going to give Ghostbusters Frozen Empire overall a C+. I can't go lower because I did admittedly have a fun time with it, but it really just could have been so much better in so many different areas. Overall, guys, in my review, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Let me know what you guys saw of this movie. All left your thoughts on it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.
I ain't afraid of no ghosts.